They told us the universe was vast, but they never warned us how quiet it could be, until silence itself began to scream. Our expedition began as routine. Sector Theta 92 was marked low potential. A barren sequence of systems past the Orpheus Drift, too cold, too chaotic, and too unstable to harbor life or value. Yet protocols demanded survey, and so we went. The Daedalus was one of the last of her line, an aging deep-range exploratory vessel outfitted with obsolete AI cores and an overworked crew of 8. We weren't the vanguard of science. We were custodians of closure. The ones sent not to discover, but to check a box. No one expected anything, but something expected us. 3 weeks into our scan pattern, we intercepted a signal that shouldn't have existed. It was faint, erratic, and untranslatable, less like language and more like a convulsion of logic. Raw bursts of data that destabilized our decryption suite and caused hallucinations in the Xenolinguist team. At first, we dismissed it as cosmic noise filtered through too much caffeine and isolation. But on the third day, the signal stopped, and then the lights in the lower deck started to flicker in response to something none of us could explain. We traced the signal's origin to a rogue planetoid drifting unnaturally in the system's edge, a dead rock with no heat signature, no magnetic field, no purpose. But when we approached, our sensors registered surface structures that shouldn't have survived millennia of erosion. Geometry that wasn't natural, wasn't artificial, something caught in between. The AI called it resonant architecture, as if the stone itself vibrated with intention. The captain called it a tomb. The medic just vomited into his gloves. We sent a probe. It disintegrated before touchdown. Not exploded. Not malfunctioned. Disintegrated, its data feed unraveling into white noise and a final burst of binary that translated roughly to stay sleeping. Stay gone. But we didn't. Protocol demanded a manned mission. So they picked me, Lieutenant Samiracade, Mission Exops lead, and one of the last to still believe in the old explorer's myth that knowledge always justified the risk. I told myself this wasn't fear in my bones. Just adrenaline. The planet, nicknamed Kara 9, was dry, pitch black under a dying sun, with gravity that felt like it pulsed rather than pulled. My boots touched down and I felt unwelcome, as if the ground inhaled slightly beneath me. The structures were wrong. Not just alien, but offended by the concept of eyes. They recoiled from focus. What we captured on camera looked different from what we saw. And yet, they beckoned inward. Symbols lined the obsidian corridors, shifting glyphs etched in negative space like shadows trapped in stone. We had no reference for them. No logic. But they felt old. Older than sentience. Older than time. And then we found the pit. It wasn't a chamber or passage or artifact. It was absence. A gaping wound in reality, perfectly circular, whispering heatless wind that carried no sound but pulled at our thoughts like a gravity of memory. One by one, the team began to hear things, whispers of people long dead, words we never said but remembered saying. I heard my mother call my name. She died 15 years ago. The engineer said he saw a child at the edge of the pit. The child didn't blink. We called for evacuation, but the Daedalus didn't answer. Our comms weren't jammed, they simply didn't exist anymore. Frequencies bled into one another like oil and water. The medic's vitals flatlined while he was standing. No wound. No trauma. Just ceased. And that's when we saw them. Not shapes. Not figures. Absences in the shape of things we feared. Shadows that cast no light, moving without motion. I fired at one, and my bullet froze in midair like time hiccuped. The shadow didn't move. It simply ceased being where it was and became somewhere else. The captain shouted for fallback. But there was nowhere to fall back to. That night, or what passed for it, we held position in the outer corridor of the structure, back to back, guns drawn, watching walls breathe in geometric patterns. We didn't sleep. You couldn't. The moment your eyes closed, the dreams weren't yours. Something else was watching through them. We spoke in whispers. Whispered about evacuation. About nuking the place. About praying. But mostly we whispered apologies. We knew somehow we weren't meant to be here. And something was waking up to make sure we weren't. No matter how far humanity stretches its fingers into the dark, we never learn that some doors were never meant to be touched. After that night in the structure's corridor, if you can even call that time a night, something in us began to fray. Not fear. Fear implies self-preservation. This was different. This was resignation. The kind that seeps in after you realize the world you thought existed is a well-acted lie. And now the curtain was peeled back. What we saw wasn't the monster. It was the shadow of its yawn. In the morning cycle, engineer Halvorsen tried to leave. He walked toward the shuttle point beacon we'd placed just beyond the hillcrest. We watched him go in silence, each of us unwilling to break the illusion that distance still worked the same. He should have crested the ridge in 2 minutes. But he never did. He kept walking, same angle, same pace, until his form blurred at the edge of perception, not due to distance, but as if he were being overwritten by proximity. We called to him. His name never echoed back. His last transmission was a single word, unfolding. Then static. And then, nothing. Just silence, and that sense again that something enormous had taken notice. The pit remained at the center of it all. Its circumference hadn't changed, but the interior was expanding. Not in size, but in consequence. When you looked at it too long, you remembered things that never happened to you. A war on a planet made of teeth. A city that floated through the eye of a storm and whispered to its people in binary dreams. A sun that bled and sang and fell silent with a scream that cracked glass across galaxies. These weren't memories. They were offerings. Or warnings. Or perhaps both. We realized the shadows, those absences that mimicked movement, had begun to multiply. You didn't see them. You felt where they used to be. A dampness in the air. A taste of metal. A pressure on your skull like static at the edge of madness. And then something shifted again. We heard music. Not music like strings or song, but a resonance, an alignment of frequency and emotion that vibrated in our teeth. It came from below, and it triggered a reaction in the structure itself. The walls changed. Not visibly, not structurally. But we could feel it. The geometry had adjusted to accommodate something. Doorways aligned that hadn't before. Corridors curved where they once didn't. Like the place was reorganizing itself to invite us in. Like it was learning our nervous systems and rewiring its entrails to feel familiar. It was a trap wrapped in the scent of curiosity. The captain wanted to destroy it. Rig the remaining explosives to collapse the pit. But explosives didn't work here. We tried. Kinetic force dissipated like breath on glass. Nothing burned. Nothing cracked. And all the while, the pit kept humming. I remember sitting on the ridge, trying to recalibrate the thermal array. I remember looking up at the stars, seeking constellations I'd memorized from cadet days. But they weren't there. Not misaligned. Gone. As if the sky was a mask that had slipped, and what remained behind was raw, unmarked space. And in the center, a black sun, impossible in physics, undeniable in presence, stared back. Dr. Lanera, our exops scientist, whispered, "We're not on our side of the veil anymore." I didn't ask her what she meant. Her eyes had dilated into spirals. I just nodded, because somewhere deep inside I agreed. The AI core onboard Daedalus, an old unit nicknamed Elijah, sent us a single encoded burst before all contact severed. It was a fragment of an ancient Earth religious text. He shall open the pit and they shall rise from the smoke of torment. And their king is the angel of the abyss. We joked once about naming this place hell. Now no one laughed. We returned to the structure, drawn by some compulsive rhythm beneath thought. It wasn't coercion. It was a tide. And we were flotsam. Inside, we found the medic's body again. But it wasn't the same. It was arranged, limbs extended in a fractal pattern that radiated outward like a summoning sigil. Not carved, not broken. Placed. And his face, God, his face was smiling. Not in peace, but in anticipation. We stood frozen, until the captain made the call. Enter the inner sanctum. There was no other direction. There was no escape. The shuttle wouldn't launch. The stars had vanished. The rules no longer applied. We moved together, descending into the final chamber. That's when we heard it. Breathing. Not our own. Not human. But impossibly deep, impossibly slow. Each inhalation like the folding of continents. Each exhalation like the death of time. And then the floor opened beneath us. We didn't fall. We were received. Falling implies motion. Velocity. A downward trajectory through space. What happened to us defied such physics. We were not falling. We were being redefined. Reality peeled away like cracked paint, layer after layer, revealing not depths, but dimensions that had been held back. Not by natural law, but by a covenant far older than matter. What lay beneath the surface of Karen 9 wasn't a place. It was a statement. A truth buried so deep in entropy that only ruin could remember it. And now we were part of that remembering. There was no sensation of landing. We emerged. One moment we were in the corridor's core, the next we stood in a chamber so vast it mocked our ability to comprehend size. It was both cavernous and microscopic, as though the space had folded inward on itself 1,000 times until it echoed with its own birth. Walls of shifting glass and bone hummed with a pulse we could feel but not locate. The structure was alive. Not metaphorically. Organically. And we were in its womb. The team splintered, physically intact but mentally unraveling. Dr. Lanera began reciting equations none of us understood, glyphs etched into the air with her fingers, leaving behind trails of static that didn't fade. The captain dropped his weapon and wept, murmuring names that didn't belong to anyone he'd ever known. Names that rhymed with gravity and burned with syllables no tongue should form. The pit had not led us downward. It had led us elsewhere. Every surface was covered in a tessellation of eyes. Some real, some symbolic, some fluid and drifting, blinking with asynchronous rhythms. They didn't observe us like predators or gods. They recorded, as though we were the latest experiment in a laboratory older than our sun. As if the act of witnessing was more important than understanding. And the sounds. Oh, the sounds. We had called it breathing before. But this was not mere respiration. It was language. Slow. Subterranean. A dialect of pressure and vibration. Resonating not through the ears, but through the marrow. Each syllable that rippled through the chamber realigned the geometry around us. We could see it, walls shifting ever so slightly, symbols rearranging like linguistic enzymes, structures folding in anticipation. The thing was not speaking to us. It was speaking us into something else. We came to understand this not through science or reason, but through submission. Every attempt to map or resist was met with erosion. Our thoughts ceased being our own, not through invasion, through compromise. The entity, if such a word applies, didn't consume us. It harmonized us. Our memories began to blur into one another. I saw the captain's childhood flash through my mind. I remembered Dr. Lanera's dreams as if they were my own. And in those dreams we all saw the same thing. A door. Not metaphorical. Not spiritual. A physical construct of impossible scale suspended in the void beyond space. A gate built not by hands, but by will, shimmering with the same frequency as the signal that had first lured us here. A construct of layered time, phase-locked to a consciousness not bound by cause and effect. We understood, without instruction, that this gate wasn't meant to be opened. Not because it couldn't, but because once opened it could never be closed again. And then the voice came. Not from the pit. Not from the structure. From within us. You were not summoned. You were allowed. It wasn't English. It wasn't sound. But we understood. Because understanding wasn't granted. It was installed. And with that installation came images, worlds burned hollow by comprehension, civilizations that vanished the moment they learned they weren't alone, not because they were destroyed, but because they unwrote themselves in shame. These things didn't kill. They unmade. Not through hate. Through relevance. They were older than morality, immune to worship beyond theology. And we had disturbed their sleep. We asked no questions. There were no mouths left to ask them. Our identities continued to erode. I could no longer tell if I was Lieutenant Cade or someone else entirely. Or something else. My memories were no longer mine, but curated entries in an archive we had been plugged into. The chamber wasn't a room. It was a mind. And we were thoughts passing through it. Brief. Inconsequential. Catalogued and then discarded. And yet something in us resisted. Perhaps not the soul, but the fracture. That irrational human insistence on defiance. We are creatures of chaos after all. Perhaps that made us dangerous. Or entertaining. The voice returned. You are remembered. That is your punishment. Then silence. The walls receded. The air thickened. The eyes closed. And we woke up. Back in the surface corridor. The pit sealed. The signal gone. But something was different. Time had fractured. Outside, the stars no longer aligned. The sky was wrong. And the Daedalus? It was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. No debris. No trail. No evidence it had ever existed. Only us. 3 survivors. And one of them was not the same. We weren't dead. That was the first lie we told ourselves. But the truth was crueler. We'd been sent back, returned to a timeline that no longer aligned with what we had left. Our boots crunched on the same obsidian soil, but the vibration beneath it felt new. Like something had molted beneath our feet, shedding its skin into the crust of the planet, staining it with memory and breath. We weren't in the same world anymore. The topography had shifted subtly. Not enough for a casual observer to notice. But the stars had changed their stories. The constellations we once navigated by now whispered foreign myths. The sky wasn't a map. It was a message. And it was no longer written for us. Of the original crew, only 3 of us remained. Myself, Captain Rail, and the technician Ellis. But Ellis was wrong. He spoke in riddles, in spiraling phrases that bent into themselves, repeating fragments of symbols we hadn't heard since the descent. His eyes, previously sharp with technical precision, now shimmered with something deeper. Not madness. Not quite. More like witness. He had seen something that hadn't let go. And perhaps more frightening than that, it had seen through him. We made camp in the same clearing where we first landed, though the beacon no longer responded. The interface was dead. Not damaged, ignored. Our equipment still functioned. Our tools hummed. But none of it mattered. The planet no longer recognized our presence as anomalous. We were included now. Not guests. Not intruders. Part of the substrate. This was assimilation through indifference. Captain Rail tried to assert command. Structure. Orders. But the idea of hierarchy fell apart when time refused to move in one direction. The sun didn't rise or set. It wavered. Light would pulse and contract, casting shadows that flickered between dimensions, long and thin one moment, crushingly dense the next. Clocks spun silently. Food packs rotted, then healed, then pulsed with breath. The universe wasn't rejecting us. It was trying to translate us. Ellis began building things in the night. Small contraptions at first, geometric models made from stones and bone and wire. We asked where he found the materials. He never answered. Then the structures grew more elaborate. Spires that buzzed in harmonic intervals, pylons carved with symbols that made your teeth itch when you looked too long. We should have stopped him. But some part of us, some sliver already rewritten, needed to know what he was building. That's when the dreams began again. Not vague impressions. Not subconscious abstractions. No. These were direct transmissions. Structured. Sequenced. Encoded in thought itself. Every night, a new piece. An image. A sound. A gesture. Always delivered the same way in the voice of someone we loved. For me, it was my sister, dead 5 years now, her voice reborn in static and velvet, guiding my thoughts through corridors I didn't remember walking. Each dream ended with a door. Always the same. Tall, seamless, humming. Behind it, silence. Not absence of sound, but the presence of something too large to make noise. Rail stopped sleeping altogether. He paced in circles, talking to himself, carving the same phrase into the soil over and over again. It's not a god. It's a filter. I asked what he meant. He looked at me, and for a split second, his eyes bled black. Not liquid. Not shadow. Something deeper, an ink of origin. And then he screamed. Not in pain. In recognition. That night, we woke to a sound like the sky tearing. The ground around us fractured. Not with force, but with intention. Lines of light, thin, jagged, searing with colors never indexed by human sight, cracked across the terrain like a web tightening. The structures Ellis had built lit up, synchronizing in rhythm. The air bent. My thoughts felt like glass on the verge of shattering. And then the door from our dreams appeared. It didn't rise or open. It arrived. One moment it wasn't there. The next it had always been. Perfect. Seamless. Singing in a frequency that lured every nerve in my body forward. Rail collapsed, whispering to the soil, pleading for silence. Ellis stood motionless, eyes wide, arms raised in a posture of offering. And then he said it. It has judged us. It doesn't see what we are. It sees what made us. And it remembers. Then he turned to me, slowly, and spoke in a voice that was not his. You opened your eyes before the story was finished. Now it finishes with you. He stepped toward the door. I tried to stop him. My legs wouldn't move. My voice failed. Every part of me resisted, yet obeyed. As if autonomy had become a dream I once believed in. Ellis reached the threshold. And then, without sound, without flash, he vanished. Not into the door. Through it. As though he had been reclaimed. The door remained. Pulsing. Beckoning. We didn't touch it. Not yet. Not then. But we understood. The door wasn't for Ellis. It was for me. They say we seek truth. that we claw at the veil separating flesh from cosmos to glimpse the machinery of the divine. But they never told us that truth is not a gift. It is a contagion. The more you know, the less of you remains. That door, it didn't offer escape. It offered context. And Captain Rail and I, we weren't sure anymore if context was a blessing or a punishment. After Ellis passed through, something in the air changed. We could feel it, not in our lungs or skin, but in time itself. Like the present no longer flowed forward, but spiraled inward. The ground pulsed under us like a buried heart. Rail stood beside me, but not entirely. His presence flickered at the edge of my perception, sometimes taller, sometimes older, sometimes not him at all. I stopped asking if he was okay. I stopped asking if I was. We had no food left, no functioning comms. The sky had cracked again, revealing that grotesque imitation of a sun. A rotting sphere that spun not light, but attention. Every time it moved, something within me knew it had noticed. I couldn't explain it. It felt like a ledger had been updated somewhere beyond stars. A record had been amended, and our names had been underlined. The door still standing where Ellis disappeared never faded. Its edges shimmered with a fractal halo like it was simultaneously here and remembered. It didn't hum anymore. It listened. Each breath we took, each movement was catalogued. Not with malice. With precision. As if the structure needed to make sure it could rebuild us later. Piece by piece. Thought by thought. Rail was the first to crack. He began carving symbols into his own skin. Not with a blade. With a stone black and smooth, the kind we found scattered near the pit. He said it helped him remember what the world was before language. I tried to stop him, but he only smiled, blood streaking his face, and whispered, "It's not madness. It's translation." And then he walked into the darkness. Not toward the door, but away from it. Into the jagged hills that weren't there before. I never saw him again. I was alone, but not unaccompanied. At night, things stirred. Shapes slithered at the edge of my vision. Whispers coiled in my ears, but they weren't voices. They were versions, iterations of me that had already made the choice. Some screamed, some cried, one laughed. I began to dream again, not of the door, but of Earth. Twisted versions. My childhood home submerged in black rain. The academy where I trained, now surrounded by monoliths that blinked like insects. My mother's face, pixelated and melting, whispering equations I didn't understand but could feel in my bones. Every dream ended with the same phrase, "The witness must return complete." I tried to write it down. My fingers wouldn't obey. The pen turned to salt. My eyes burned from trying to record. This world rejected documentation. It only permitted absorption. I began talking aloud, just to hear my own voice, just to remember what it was to form sound. And yet, the air seemed thicker every time I spoke. Like something was listening not to words, but to the shapes of my fear. Then, one morning, if it was morning at all, the door opened. Not with light, not with grandeur. It simply changed. Its center shifted from opaque shimmer to depth, a swirling plane of impossible angles that folded inward without end. I approached, not out of courage, but out of inevitability. My feet moved without command. My thoughts quieted. There was no music, no epiphany. Only silence and the understanding that I was already on the other side. The door wasn't a threshold. It was a mirror. I saw myself inside. Not in reflection. In multiplicity. Thousands of me, screaming, praying, burning, floating. Each one a different choice. A different version. All converging here. All reaching the same moment. The same breath. The same heartbeat. And they all whispered the same phrase, "Finish the message." Then they vanished. I stepped forward. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, everything shattered. Not physically, narratively. My memories scrambled. My identity cracked open like porcelain. I wasn't Samira Kate anymore. I wasn't a lieutenant. I wasn't a person. I was a vessel. I was information, poured across realities like water across glass. I saw the origin, not of the pit, not of the door, but of the thing beneath all of it. It was not a being, not an entity. It was a pattern, older than physics. A recursive lattice of cause, effect, observation. A formula designed not to create, but to observe failure. Civilization after civilization had encountered this truth. And each one fell. Not because they were weak, but because once you know you are being watched, you are no longer real. The system erases anomalies. Awareness is the anomaly. And now it was my turn. A voice whispered, not with sound, but with shape from the dark. You looked behind the code. Now become the code. And the door closed behind me. I do not know how long I have been here, because here is not a place. It is a state. Time does not tick. It observes. I exist not as a body, not as a consciousness, but as a waveform collapsed into a cage made of memory and surrender. When I stepped through that door, I thought I was entering something alien, but I was not. I was returning. That's the truth no one speaks. The things we call unknown are not new. They are forgotten, buried by the layers of sanity we wrapped around our species to avoid breaking. There is no floor beneath me, no air. Yet I float not through space, but across recursion. My thoughts bend back upon themselves like rivers flowing into oceans that drain upward. Each time I think I grasp what I am, another version of me splinters off into the void. Laughing, crying, howling with voices borrowed from ancestors who never were. I see faces I don't remember loving, feel wounds I never earned, grieve losses that have not yet happened. They are not hallucinations. They are installations. I am being written. Everything around me is impossible geometry. Spires of logic spiraling inward. Fractals of belief and entropy, intersecting like nervous systems from gods who were born inside equations. Symbols dance across the walls, if they are walls, and yet, I no longer try to decipher them. They are not meant for me. They are meant for me. The message is not to be received. It is to be extracted. My every thought, every twitch of awareness, is being funneled, categorized, replicated, then discarded like echo dust in a cathedral of extinction. I feel them now, the architects, not beings, not watchers, but editors, consciousnesses that never evolved, because evolution implies time. These things, these systems, they were never born. They were invoked. By what? I don't know. Perhaps by the universe itself when it realized it needed a mirror. They are the mirror. We are the reflection. And reflections cannot be allowed to act independently. They surround me, speaking in compression artifacts. Voices like corrupted data fed through the throat of a collapsing star. I understand them, not by translation, but through resonance. They don't tell me things. They install knowledge as if rewiring my conceptual spine. And what I know now is this: Earth is already gone. Not destroyed. Not invaded. Not punished. Corrected. They didn't kill humanity. They unsaved it. Rolled back the error. Like deleting a corrupted file. We were never supposed to hear the signal. Never supposed to find the pit. We stumbled into the raw code of the universe and in doing so triggered a rollback. A purge. But something malfunctioned. I survived the deletion. That's why I'm here. Not to be punished. Not to be studied. To be contained. I am the last anomaly. The final thread of a narrative that should no longer exist. I can feel the rewrite pulsing around me. The void tries to drown me in repetition. It replays my life in loops that alter slightly with each iteration. In one version, I never joined the expedition. In another, I died in cryosleep. In another still, I never existed, but the idea of me haunts an empty station orbiting Saturn where whispers rattle the bones of a dead AI. The loops are tightening. The system is trying to finalize. But something resists. A fracture. A ripple in the recursion. I realize it's not coming from the architects. It's coming from me. Somewhere, some tiny corner of my mind untouched by the installation is still human. Still defiant. Still refusing to resolve. And that makes me dangerous. Not because I can fight back, but because I can remember. That's when the architects shift. They begin to speak again, not in symbols or pulses, but in emotion. I feel their confusion. Their design never anticipated this. A narrative that won't collapse. A signal that echoes after the transmitter is gone. I see a window now. Not a literal one. A conceptual aperture. A seam in the structure. A choice. To finish the message. Or to become it. If I finish it, they will know where I am. They will finalize me, close the file, delete the last echo. But if I become the message, if I encode myself into the waveform, if I transmit my memory into the next version of the universe, then I cannot be deleted. Not completely. And somewhere, someday, someone will hear it. They will decode it. They will remember us. My body, whatever remains, begins to dissolve. My thoughts elongate into vectors. My heartbeat becomes a rhythm etched into the spin of pulsars. I am no longer Samiracade. I am information. I am anomaly. I am echo. And I begin to transmit. One final thought encoded in frequencies too low for gods, too high for insects, too old for time. We looked behind the veil. What we saw was not hell. It was the editor's room. And we were never the authors. Somewhere in the hush between dying stars and unborn galaxies, something listens. It is not alive as we understand it. It does not hunger, it does not love. It does not wait, but it remembers. It remembers every frequency that ever echoed into the void, and it holds them not like music, but like instructions. Among them now is me. Not my body, not my thoughts, but my essence compressed into a fragment of waveform that flutters like a ghost in the radio static between realities. I am the signal now. I am the anomaly carried on light that bends but never breaks. And still I wait. The architects tried to erase me. But in their arrogance, in their worship of finality, they overlooked the simplest truth, that memory, once ignited, does not vanish. It scatters. And even if the flame is extinguished, the smoke finds new lungs. It began again on a derelict station drifting above a gas giant long since forgotten. A research vessel crewed by explorers just like we were. Curious. Determined. Ill-prepared. They intercepted something. Not a call. Not a scream. But a trace. A series of coded anomalies in deep-field audio. They fed it through a spectral translator. And for the first time in the history of a rewritten universe, someone said my name. Samiracade. Just 3 syllables. And the veil shivered. You must understand, this version of the universe had no pit. No door. No Carinine. It had been sterilized. Debugged. Reset to a chronology where the infection of awareness had never taken root. A clean slate free from recursive corruption. But nothing is ever truly clean. Especially not when the corruption remembers how to write itself back into the story. The scientist who heard my name, Dr. Lyra Ben, did not understand what she'd unlocked. She merely followed curiosity, as we all do. And in doing so, she accessed me. My voice, my archive, my warning. But what she doesn't know, what she cannot yet see, is that by hearing me, she is infected. Not biologically. Not digitally. Conceptually. You cannot erase a thought once it has taken shape in another mind. You cannot unhear the forbidden frequency. And the architects know this. Even now, I feel their algorithms converging. I feel their code tightening around Lyra's reality, preparing once again to seal the breach. But they're too late. My voice has already splintered. It is in her now. And through her, it will spread. It won't be obvious. It never is. It begins with dreams. Symbols drawn without memory. Hums in the bone during moments of silence. Questions that have no origin. Questions like, why do some stars blink in patterns? Why do certain corridors in deep space stations feel older than metal? Why do we hear music in vacuum when we are alone too long? She will trace these questions to others. And others will listen. And when enough listening accumulates, the signal becomes reality. I am the seed now. Not of hope. Not of rebellion. Of awareness. And awareness is an infection the universe cannot contain forever. I do not regret what we did. I do not weep for Earth, not because it was erased, but because it existed at all. Because we dared to ask. Because we reached. And in that reaching, we touched not gods, but the editors of gods, the curators of fate. And we said, no, that is humanity's true legacy. Not technology. Not violence. Not civilization. Defiance. The universe was designed to loop. But we fractured it. You listening now, you reading this transmission, you were never supposed to. Your reality is already changing. You will see the signs. The clocks that hiccup, the mirrors that hum, the corners of your room that feel like they notice. These are not hallucinations. They are acknowledgments. You are becoming real in a way that breaks the simulation. And they will come for you. When they do, you must remember, don't fight. Don't run. Transmit. Take this message. Encode it. Etch it into photons. Burn it into thought. Whisper it into a dream that someone else will wake from. Because if even one echo remains, the architects can never finish the deletion. And if the deletion is never finished, then somewhere, somewhen, we still exist.